The barbarians now attacking us may come, as barbarians always had from time immemorial, in various tribal shades. Some are Islamists, some are Marxists, some are nihilists, moved by nothing more than their sense of incoherent rage and despair, and by the beastly pleasure of setting anything, no matter what, on fire. Their goal, however, is all the same: sacking our empire. It is such an honor to be here tonight at this great American university, the Hogwarts of America, if I will, the future of American higher education. I normally am accustomed to stammering drunkenly on a stage and saying what's in my mind, but it occurs to me that the day is far too solemn and far too somber to let these kind of permutations run freely. And so I shared some thoughts, which by design are intended to be provocations, intended to be not the end of a conversation, but rather the beginning, which I hope it will turn to very soon after I am done. And I'd like to start in pure Jewish fashion with a confession, which is that I despise anniversaries. I realize it's a jagged statement with which to start a talk commemorating the 2-year anniversary of October 7. But it's a necessary one, because anniversaries, sadly, too often put us exactly in the wrong kind of mood. They ask us to be ruminative, nostalgic, to take a moment and celebrate or mourn, depending on the occasion, the notion, the thing that happened. And I'm sad to say that today, we do not have the luxury to do any of that. Because the war that started on October 7, 2023 isn't over yet. In fact, it's only just beginning. And the war is not a war in Israel. It's a war in America, a war in the West, a war on all of us. You can tell it's a war on us by the fact that yesterday, in every single American city, with the possible exception of this blessed metropolis, animals carrying flags of Hamas were rioting in every corner, laying siege to buildings, harassing people, and saying, as I'm sure some of you have seen cited in the media, that October 7th was just the beginning. You could tell it's a war on us by the fact that 2 years now, the same ghouls that have targeted specifically American traditions, violently disrupting the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree lighting ceremony, say, or the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. You could tell it's a war on us because 2 young people, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram, were executed in cold blood in the streets of Washington, D.C. by an assassin shouting, "Free Palestine." You could tell it's a war on us because our enemies are telling us as much in clear and uncertain terms, taking to social media and to the streets and to anywhere else to tell us that it is America that is their final goal. We may choose to ignore them, but that would be a foolish choice. Just ask England, where just the other week, 2 people were slaughtered during the holiest day of the Jewish year by the unimprovably named Jihad al-Shami, a Syrian migrant on bail for rape. We may choose to appease them, but that would be even more deadly. Just ask Spain, a country whose prime minister said that if he had a nuclear weapon, he would drop it on Israel. And yet, this extremely pro-Palestinian country is experiencing one of the most devastating, disruptive wave of rallies in support of Hamas. Because if the truth, if we're being honest, is that our war is not against Hamas, a small, savage, and thankfully negligible terror group. Our war is against Palestine, which is not and never will be a country, but a code word. Palestine was invented in 1964, 3 years before Israel won the Six-Day War, acquiring Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, an event its detractors stupidly called the occupation. It was invented by an Egyptian conman named Yasser Arafat, who proposed that the distinct Arab Khamulas, or family-based tribes, inhabiting cities like Gaza and Ramallah and Hebron, are somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, a single people, the people of Palestine. And the purpose of Palestine was always very clear. Palestine was invented as a way of allowing guilt-ridden liberals, despairing of Western civilization and traditions, to have a torrid affair with third-world violence in politics, an emotionally thrilling, if morally vacuous, assignation, for which the only ones ever to pay any price would be those pesky Jews. But Palestine, like every good revolutionary movement, wanted more. Palestine wanted to replace the order it came to reject. Instead of Judeo-Christian morality, it wanted to sanctify raw power. Instead of achievement, victimhood. Instead of compassion, genocide. Only if you understand this point do you understand the many strange permutations of Palestine as we see them now. Why, for example, would so many people identifying as queer or transgender march for Hamas, an organization that publicly executes gays? Why would progressive college students declaring their commitment to virtues like diversity, equity, and inclusion also pledge allegiance to an ideology that oppresses women and stifles personal and civil liberties? It seems to make absolutely no sense, and for far too long, our sharpest minds, our best critics, have dismissed such inconsistencies as folly, as a sign that the young Hamas enthusiasts in college campuses, in entertainment and elsewhere, were simply too dumb, too feeble-minded to comprehend their moral missteps. That is incorrect and dangerous. It's a dangerous misreading of the situation, because those self-described queers or progressives for Palestine understand precisely what they are doing. They are cheering for the downfall of our civilization, the civilization that they hate. And they're consistent. When Tron de Aragua terrorists in this country illegally inflict pain and suffering on American citizens, and then, just like their Hamas brethren in Gaza, hide behind children to escape consequence, the same ghouls who riot for Palestine turn up to riot against agents of the federal government out to restore the rule of law. And the same harpies who go on TV to squawk about the alleged genocide in Gaza also take to the media to claim that American officers, and not the terrorists, are the moral monsters. This is what a globalized intifada truly looks like. It's a perfectly coherent vision, a vision of the barbarians triumphing over civilization. Now, these days, when we hear words like barbarians or civilization, we snigger, because we're all very educated individuals. We were forged in the crucible of post-Cold War America, in an imaginary faraway time called the 1990s, which I've had a pleasure of living through, with one or two noted exceptions, believing that history was slouching to an end, replaced instead by a very charming fairy tale. And our very charming fairy tale went something like this. All people are basically good. All cultures are basically the same. Sure, they differ in curious and interesting ways. Hey, look, this one has a festival involving song and dance, and that one flies kites and lights lanterns during the winter solstice. But all cultures, goes the fairy tale, share a profound human truth, namely that human beings value nothing more than their own well-being and the well-being of their children. All of which makes the species a cheerfully rational lot. Scratch a human across all nations and cultures, and you will find the same deep desire, the desire for a nice home, a decent income, and good opportunities for upward mobility. But every fairy tale needs its ogres. And so we have those baddies we call extremists. extremists. They too come in many shades. There's the menacing Israeli minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wants to chew up Arab babies, or the villainous Yihya Sinwar and his band of October 7 marauders. But the differences don't really matter all that much. The only thing to know about the baddies is that they stand in the way of the common dream of peace and prosperity that unites all of us. Which is why, in fairy tale land, choosing sides is an intolerable act of prejudice, because the global village has no sides. In the global village, we're all the same and all equal, which means that our only duty as good, moral, compassionate, nice people is to make sure we keep ogres like Bibi Netanyahu or Donald J. Trump out of power. It's a moral commitment. It's an inspiring story, this fairy tale, swirling with the spirit of the Enlightenment. It's also completely, patently, and utterly false. The barbarians we're facing, marching under the black, white, green, and red flag of Palestine, have no interest in peace, love, and human rights. They desire very different outcomes: the destruction of the world's sole Jewish state, the collapse of American-led Western capitalism, and the conversion and or subjugation, whichever comes first, of non-believers by any means necessary. To do that, they will stop at nothing. The infidels must be killed at any cost. Describe this worldview, currently on display on a city block near you, to your average pundit or professor anywhere else than UATX, or progressive politician, and they will dismiss it as grotesque. That similar beliefs have guided much of the species throughout much of the course of human events in both Islamic countries and in the West matters to our self-appointed moral and intellectual superiors not a whiff. They have no use for history's mightiest engine, the one fueled by the clash of incompatible ideas, cultures, beliefs, and aspirations. After all, they will tell you, we are no longer apes. We're human beings, proudly godless and infinitely perfectible, and above all, peaceful by nature. So what if Rome destroyed Carthage and the barbarians sacked Rome? And so what if Reynald de Chatillon prevailed in the Battle of Montesquieu before being beheaded by Saladin nearly 2 decades later in Chitin? Such unremitting clashes between mutually exclusive forces belong in the yellowing pages of antiquity, now long gone, not in the slick pages of our smart contemporary newspapers. And yet, as we lull ourselves with soothing stories of our shared humanity and settlements on Mars and possible immortality thanks to the wonders of gene editing and whatever technological innovations are coming down the pike, our foes march on. They march not only on the Jews, forever the canaries in the coal mine, but also on London and on Paris and on Sydney and on Frankfurt, demanding acquiescence to ways of living and beliefs that we once rightfully condemned as barbaric or else. Go visit a public park in Birmingham, England, or London, or attempt to buy lunch in downtown Athens or Malmö, Sweden. And it's obvious that Europe is dying. Its native populations, folkways, religions, and languages being replaced by people whose relationship with their host countries is marked by 1 part resentment, 3 parts contempt. Terrified European elites presiding over shrinking populations and dwindling resources, no other way but to submit, while justifying their submission through ever more elaborate rituals of pretense and denial. Israel, of course, has no such privilege, which is why Israel is slowly emerging from the dream palace it has spent 2 decades erecting under the exciting banner called the peace process. Just like that American fairy tale I just shared with you, Israel too had a fairy tale of its own. Give the Palestinians enough money, enough land, enough leeway, and eventually they will change their ways. They will abandon their murderous plans. They will declare a prosperous and productive state, side by side with Israel, another peaceful oasis in the Middle East. This fairy tale, too, was too strong to be interrupted by occasional bouts of murderous violence, which were dismissed as aberrations, or by the fact that the despotic leader of the Palestinian Authority, now I believe on year 12 of his 4-year term, dedicated most of his resources to rewarding anyone who murdered Jews, the notorious policy we know as pay for slay. Up until the night of October 6, 2023, Israelis, for the most part, believed that we were one final concession away from finally appeasing our neighbors into peace. Now, hallelujah, Israelis know better. They understand that land and humiliation are sadly the only two currencies that carry any weight in their corner of the world, which is why they understand, too, that they must resist European pressures to once again reconcile with their executioners, and instead they must wage a decisive war, denying their enemies the pleasure of launching another October 7-style massacre. Even as I grieve for the victims of that attack 2 years ago yesterday, even as I pray for the speedy and safe return of our hostages, as we have done in synagogue every single day for 2 years now, I am, to be frank, not all that worried about Israel. Israel faces and continue to faces many and mighty challenges. That is true. It may yet stumble on its route to victory. That is certain. But Israelis, young and old, have proven again and again and again that they're up to the task. My friends, middle-aged lawyers and teachers and rabbis and shopkeepers, have spent hundreds of days in miluim, or reserve duty, fighting on the front lines. The wives continue to care for their children and their families by themselves while also carrying the burden of supporting the household financially. From the overwhelmed and complacent victims of October 7, Israel regained its composure, went on the attack, eliminated Hezbollah in Lebanon, crippled the Houthis in Yemen, and dealt the regional engine of terror, Iran, a debilitating blow. If I was a betting man, I would bet Israel is going to be just fine. Which brings me back to us. Because while Israel is showing great resilience, fighting its enemies since October 7, we here in America and in the West are still lagging behind. How do we win this war? How do we keep America from becoming another Britain, a country where a woman, Lucy Connolly, advocating mass deportations on social media, was arrested and denied bail, while Jihad al-Shami, the same Syrian-born migrant who slaughtered 2 people in the synagogue in Manchester just the other week, raped a woman and was immediately set free on bail, lest anyone accuse the government of racism. How do we keep America from falling so low? It is obviously a very complicated question, and it requires an intricate and detailed answer, an answer no one brief talk could ever capture. But because the hour is very late, we could break down the work ahead into 3 essential steps. First, we must learn and understand and recognize our opponents. The barbarians now attacking us may come, as barbarians always had from time immemorial, in various tribal shades. Some are Islamists, some are Marxists, some are nihilists, moved by nothing more than their sense of incoherent rage and despair, and by the beastly pleasure of setting anything, no matter what, on fire. Their goal, however, is all the same: sacking our empire. I say empire because while we must learn to recognize our enemies, we must also learn to recognize ourselves. All grumbling to the contrary, all historical connotations that make so many of us, especially those of us who lived through the 90s and the war in Iraq, so uncomfortable. The United States of America is every bit an empire. Not, God forbid, a hollow empire interested in acquisition of territory and influence and raw power, but an empire of goodness, a godly empire, shining its light on an increasingly benighted world as it has done for 250 years now. It's precisely this light, precisely this goodness that infuriates the barbarians, which is why they're everywhere at work to extinguish it. They ululate that Hamas is noble and justified, while Israel, still fighting to return its captive hostages, is somehow guilty of terrible crimes. They argue that observable and empirical human biology is an oppressive construct, that we must not only choose our pronouns at will, but also mutilate perfectly healthy children and call it gender-affirming care. They teach that marriage is oppression, family is a sentence, children an assault on the environment, and they cheer when our national birth rate plummets to historic lows. These ideas are not disparate. They're part of the same coherent worldview, the barbarian worldview. And it's no coincidence at all that you will find all of them financed by the same swollen global philanthropies and championed by the same progressive politicians. Having identified the barbarians and having learned that they're no longer at the gates, but comfortably ensconced in every corner of our culture, it is time for step two. We tend these days to spend a lot of time doom scrolling. We're very prone to rage and despair, to sharing with each other the latest bit of news and saying, could you believe that so-and-so said such and such? That is sometimes useful, but largely dangerous, because there is much we can and much we must do to make sure we reject the barbarians and everything they desire. The left's power vertical is mighty. It could decree, say, that a certain perfectly acceptable word is now offensive, or demand that a formerly beloved entrepreneur now be treated as a pariah because of his political views. But it does not get to define what the law means. And our Constitution and system of government alike, hallelujah, give us a box full of very sharp tools designed precisely to eliminate this sort of overwhelming threat to our freedoms. Examples abound. Since we are here, we'll start with the most obvious. Academic freedom doesn't mean you get to indoctrinate children and teach all manners of vile insanity while insisting on public funding. Every state in this union, at every level of schooling, has local government-approved curricula precisely to make sure some zealot doesn't hijack the hearts and minds of young Americans. We can, we should, and we must deny any academic institution engaged in bigoted madness, even a dime of public funds, and vigorously punish any failure to protect students from the repercussions of failing to succumb to groupthink. The Trump administration, thankfully, is already doing exactly that. And if you don't believe me, just ask my alma mater, Columbia University, now $250 million poorer. Individual judges in Colorado or California have precisely zero legal authority to stop the executive branch from exercising its lawful powers under the Constitution. This principle has been affirmed again and again by the Supreme Court, and yet we see activist judges repeatedly inventing laws that simply don't exist and usurping power they simply do not have. These judges need to be stopped and, whenever appropriate, immediately disbarred and forbidden from holding office ever again. Americans who openly call for the overthrow of the lawfully constituted government of the United States are engaging in sedition. They belong in prison. People who have open ties to designated terror groups, or, say, wave flags of terror groups in the streets, are a grave threat to our national security. They can and must be removed from America post-haste. Doctors who perform gruesome medical experiments on children under the guise of gender-affirming care or believing in fairies or any other feverish ideology should be jailed and prosecuted for child abuse, and the administrators of their healthcare systems who let these horrors happen should be arrested and prosecuted as well. So-called progressive activists who take money from Neville Roy Singham, a self-proclaimed communist with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, who runs his operations out of Beijing, should be arrested and prosecuted for being part of a seditious conspiracy to disrupt the domestic peace of the United States in the interest of a hostile foreign nation. None of these measures are extreme, and all are perfectly legal and entirely precedented. They're all absolutely necessary. Holding quiet candlelight vigils, or town hall meetings on Zoom, or lectures in universities, writing nice op-eds, or speaking on podcasts won't win us the war. To do that, we need to crush the titanic structure erected by the left and free our republic from these ruinous designs. And that's not a project for just one candidate or just one political party. It's a civilizational reclamation project. And reclaiming civilization, as one smart observer recently noted on X, is a team sport. Which brings me to my third and most important point, which I can summarize in just one word: build. These days, again, all of us are sporting something of an outrage addiction. We go online, we consume content decided by algorithms, and we emerge enraged. And the rage often makes us forget what it is that we're actually fighting for. Many of us have come to see our political moment as some sort of summer camp escapade in which the red team must lord it over the blue team and secure bragging rights in perpetuity. This is how we lose. We win by reminding ourselves every hour of every day that the thing we're fighting for is not the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. It's not the Jews or the Catholics or the evangelicals or the Muslims or the Hindus. It isn't Trump or never Trump. It isn't left or right. The thing we're fighting for is America. And America, I mean this quite literally, is a magical place. The name of this great and godly country in Hebrew tells you everything you need to know about it. In Hebrew, we call America Artzot Habrit, the lands of the covenant. America is a covenant between us and God. And if you've read even just a few pages of the Bible, you know that a covenant is a very weird thing. A covenant is not a contract. You sign a contract because you want no surprises. You want nothing to change. You want to know precisely what is going to happen and when and how. You're in control of each and every circumstance and eventuality. A covenant works the opposite way. A covenant is all about change. God taps Abraham, a perfectly ordinary man, not because he is perfect, but because he is capable of growth, capable of becoming the great founder of civilization God knows he is destined to be. And we, his descendants, now face the same challenge. Every 100 years or so, this covenantal country is called upon to renew the covenant we signed in 1776. We renewed it once in 1861 when we fought a bloody civil war so that we may once again proclaim liberty throughout the land. We renewed it again in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, again rising to the occasion and struggling to secure liberty for all. And here we are, right here, right now, called upon to renew this covenant once again. Renewing the covenant doesn't mean restoring it to its previous state. We may indeed lose some institutions previously imagined to be indispensable. And we may find that the tenor of American cultural and political life in 2025 is nothing like it was in 1964, just like the tenor of American life in 1964 was nothing like that of 1861. That is perfectly normal. Ours is not a nostalgic pursuit. Quite the opposite. It's a project of renewal and revival. And renewal and revival can only happen if we build the infrastructure we need right now. I consider those of you in the room right now the luckiest Americans to have lived in a very long time. To you falls the privilege of reimagining this great nation by once again plugging it back into its twin sources of infinitely renewable energy, into the Constitution, our founding political document, and into the vision of the prophets of Israel as expressed in the Bible, our founding moral document. You're already smart enough to have found your way to a new and brilliant university, here to reclaim and revive the great tradition of excellence in American higher education, scandalously abandoned by so many other colleges that ought to have known so much better. And in the months and years to come, you will build. You will build new companies that address new challenges in every field of life. You will build new organizations that bring together passionate and optimistic people who believe in America's promise. In physics and philosophy and every other realm of human endeavor, you will find great new ways to affirm and reaffirm this nation's singular, undeniable greatness. In doing so, and only in doing so, you will finally defeat the barbarians, showing them that the true golden age of America is yet ahead of us, and that their vision of suffering and destruction holds no sway in a nation forever committed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Things may seem grim right now. Signs of decadence and evil are all around us. The challenges, it is true, are many. But mark this anniversary, the anniversary of October 7, if not exactly a happy one, then one of great clarity and great promise. October 7 is the day when the barbarians launched their war on our civilization. And October 7 is the day we will always remember as the beginning of their complete, total, and resounding defeat. And with that, I think we should have a conversation.
I'm Jacob.
Hello, Jacob.
I love tablets. I subscribe to it. It's great
Thank
stuff. You said earlier that one of the central problems we face in the West is that we're not willing to face up to civilizational conflict enough. But you also said that the Palestinians weren't really a nation, that it was all made up by Yasser Arafat in 1964. Don't these two ideas kind of go at odds with each other? If you're saying that we need to be more honest with ourselves about the fact that we are fighting other civilizations, isn't part of that also acknowledging that our enemies really are nations, entities, peoples that actually do have the power to threaten us, and not just, figments of the liberal imagination?
If it were true, that would be a very good idea. However, historically, I made the point of noting the sordid history of the idea of Palestine precisely because it is not a clash between two great civilizations. It is not one side offering a certain solution, the other side offering a very different solution, the kind of dynamic we had, say, during the Cold War, in which you could say, well, you could be a proponent of capitalism, or you could give this communist thing a try. The whole notion of establishing and erecting Palestine, again, not a nation, not a people, but an ideological construct, was precisely as a Trojan horse, precisely as a wedge with which to disrupt and destroy our civilization from within. If you see what these people are proposing, they are proposing nothing that is constructive towards their end. I'll give you just one embarrassingly obvious example. If you actually cared about the well-being of children in Gaza, if you truly wanted, as people who purport to be pro-Palestinian said that they wanted from the get-go, for the war to end, since President Trump brought up his ceasefire agreement, you ought to have had massive demonstrations. All of these same people who marched against Israel now marching in the street calling on Hamas to accept a ceasefire and peace plan now embraced not just by the United States and Israel, but by virtually every Arab nation. The fact of the matter is, not only did you not have any of these demonstrations, but the same exact people who spent so much time squawking about ceasefire now, like, for example, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, now changed their tune overnight completely and said, actually, no, ceasefire is yet another Zionist Republican plot to kill more Gazan babies. The inconsistency, the moral lunacy, and the addiction to suffering is not just appalling, but it also tells you everything you need to know. There is no end goal that is actually positive or constructive towards some actual group of people's well-being. All there is destruction. I'll end with one story. recently brought to light by a dear friend whose statue, which I believe she dislikes, stands right over there, Barry Weiss, who had over a journalist who covered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for quite a bit. And he said one of the most shocking thing is he interviewed a woman who was treated by Israel. She was born with some health condition. She was treated by Israel for most of her life. And then one day, she was on her way to the hospital where she received treatments in Israel for all this time, and was arrested at the border carrying a suicide vest, confessing that her aim was to go to the hospital where Jewish nurses and doctors have worked tirelessly to save her life and blow them all up. And once she was out of prison, this reporter went to visit her and said, "Do you regret this?" And she said, "Oh, not at all. The only thing I regret is that I didn't have the opportunity to be a shaheed, to be a martyr." Again, to Western ears, that is shocking and sort of almost incomprehensible, but it is a very, very distinct ideology, not an ideology built on any kind of positive outcomes, simply an ideology that wishes to be at war with us. We should take it seriously.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Name?
Merrick.
Hey.
Hey. You gave the example of Renard de Chatillon and Saladin, ostensibly as an example of that long past violence, but more pointedly.
That doesn't happen at all today.
Sure. But more pointedly as an example of an Islamic attack, Islamic violence against the West. Yet, for centuries after the Crusades, the medieval and Renaissance view of Saladin was as this noble warrior, someone admirable, and the way they regarded Renard de Chatillon was hardly favorable. I wonder if your call for an American-Israeli crusade doesn't merit kind of the same historical reaction as that. Isn't there a rationale behind the kind of consensus view of these characters that still prevails today? And aren't you risking incurring that same kind of historical regard when you take violent measures again and incite a kind of anti-jihad? Doesn't it rile up the same sentiments?
I cannot tell you how much I love this question, because I think it gets profoundly and precisely to the heart of the matter. There is a great big danger, a risk that you run when you look at your opponent and see your opponent as something less than. Saladin was richly deserving of the respect that he had awarded. But the big difference is this: we are not on a crusade to claim God's country halfway across the world. Not are we at war with any one particular faith tradition or group of people. I think seeing the world like this is a fast one-way ticket to irredeemable, incurable bigotry. What we're saying is something completely different and very simple. We're saying that some ideas are incompatible. If you told me, "Listen, man, I'm a communist. I actually do not believe in private property. I think that the state should own all the means of production and give to each according to their needs, etc., etc." I would say, okay, well, that's a very nice way to look at the world. However, it is completely incompatible with life in America. I would go much further. You could say, which would be the more jagged question, hey man, but weren't similar objections raised against your own people? Weren't the Jews who came here early in the 20th century sort of widely reviled and believed to be agents of socialism, anarchism, and chaos? And the answer is yes, because for the most part, many of them were. They came from Eastern European traditions where this kind of agitation, where these kinds of ideologies, this kind of belief were rampant. They organized in this country according to what they knew. And they were made to believe and understand very rapidly that in America we do things very differently. And they were given a choice. Do you want to stick to the old incompatible ideas that you brought from Europe, which is not Judaism, but rather socialism, anarchism, etc., or do you want to become Americans? Thankfully, they chose the latter, which is how you got the Lehman Brothers, the Marx Brothers, all kinds of other brothers and sisters and good people who did a lot to rebuild America. But it was certainly a decision of a group of people to adhere and adopt to this culture. And it was certainly a decision of this culture to say, I'm really sorry, but if you're going to behave in this way, shape, or form, that is not going to work for us. Now, I want to say something even more radical. We have a tradition, especially in vaunted institutions such as this one, to hallow notions like freedom of speech, rule of law, democracy. The truth of the matter is that there's nothing inherently great about freedom of speech or rule of law or democracy. All of those things are tools. They're guardrails. They're part of a very specific socioeconomic political theory designed at a certain point in time and a certain point of place to guarantee a certain series of rights and privileges. But if you come here and say, hey, I reject the entire premise of our shared civilization, but I demand you give me these protections, because freedom of speech means that I have the right to march with the Hamas flag and say, I am here to kill all of you, that's not noble adherence to principle, that's suicide. So while we can completely admire the courage of modern-day Saladins who fight for what they believe is their cause, while we might welcome them under the auspices of adhering to our specific set of cultural beliefs, we must be very, very, very careful not to mistake diversity, equity, and inclusion for a flag meaning, hey, everyone is welcome, even or especially those who want to destroy us. I think that's an important, subtle, and crucial difference.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I have my question is.
You have to tell me your name first.
Oh, I'm Harland.
Hello, Harland.
I believe my question is, what do you think the root cause of these dangerous ideas are? Like the idea that stems of like jihadism and these ideas that many people have that we need to just accept all cultures despite what they believe. What do you think is the root cause of these ideas that are very blatantly harmful to people?
Emptiness. I think that's actually quite an easy question to answer. I wrote a piece after a man many of us admired, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated in front of our very eyes. I was angrier when I watched this than I'd been in a very, very long time, and trying to make sense of what happened. Wrote a piece saying that the shooter did not emerge out of some vacuum. He emerged out of a decades-long effort to create people just like him. When you tell young people that their bodies are a fiction that they must overcome, that their families are an oppressive structure that they must reject, that their nation is bad, that their only hope to become good, meaningful people is to live as isolated, insulated, extremely online individuals who obey every whim of the uni-party structure that includes political players, cultural players, all marching in unison and demanding acquiescence. That is how you create broken, lonely, rageful people yearning for meaning. And then if you tell them that this meaning is shooting Charlie Kirk, they love it. If you tell them that this meaning is marching against the Jews, they love it. If you tell them that this meaning means desecrating some American monument or tradition, they love it because they have come to believe that all these things that we hold so dear are in fact evil. And that to me is the absolute great civilizational challenge. We see what happens if you don't correct this in time in Europe. I don't believe for 1 second that America will ever fall, because I believe in America's divine promise. But unless we stand, and this also goes to the Saladin question before, unless we make it very, very clear that we have a civilization here with very particular ideas that are incompatible with a lot of other ideas. In fact, it is better than a lot of other ideas. In fact, it is better than all other ideas, and we are willing to love it and sacrifice it with all of our might. We're not going to win this. What we have here is a whole host of lost souls looking for some motivation and finding it in the clutches of well-financed, well-organized barbarians who are all marching in lockstep.
Thank you.
I'm Nate. Thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to know, what does free speech mean to you, and where does the First Amendment free speech for U.S. citizens end and arrestable sedition begins?
Oh, this is kind of like an incredibly easy question, thankfully. I'm grateful that of my many missteps in life, going to law school was not one of them. I made a lot of other bad choices. This is one I somehow circumvented. But I think, first of all, to start with a second part of your question, which is a simpler part of your question, I think the law gives us a not incredibly black and white clear-cut answer, but clear-cut enough to say, for example, that anyone who is pledging their allegiance to an organization designated as a terrorist group by the U.S. Department of State, supporting it by funds, in touch with its officers, distributing its materials, as we see on every college campus in America, that person fits the bill squarely. And if that person is not an American citizen, that person needs to be deported right away. If that person is applying for American citizenship, as we see many of the organizers of these mini pogroms and campuses doing right now, that application needs to be stopped right away. And if that person is an American citizen, I think we need to clearly evaluate what the actual degree of involvement with these groups are. The reason I noted, for example, Neville Singham by name, here is an agent of a foreign government who is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to groups and individuals committed to disrupting the peace. To me, that is a very clear-cut legal precedent there to go ahead and act against these groups and against these individuals. That's on the dry legalistic level. But you asked the bigger question, and I want to repeat what I said a minute ago because I think it's very, very important. We run a very dangerous risk if we become absolutist of any sort, but particularly if we say, no, the thing that we actually value above all is free speech. Free speech, again, is a guardrail towards having the kind of society that we want to have. A guardrail that requires that everyone participate in the same game, playing by the same rules, committed to the same traditions. The diversity doesn't come from our ability or our decision to go ahead and each make individual rules as to what the American Commonwealth ought to be. That's not at all the meaning of the framers and the founding fathers. And so I think that when we look at something like freedom of speech, we should also ask ourselves whether or not the people purporting to hide behind it aren't doing it solely for the cause of spreading further chaos and violence, and if they're doing it in the service of a foreign hostile terrorist organization or government, I think there could be absolutely no doubt that these people or organizations or individuals or whatever they be need to be acted upon with all the force and all the might that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you for this excellent speech. I'm Deacon.
Hello.
One of the 7 Noahide laws is to establish courts of justice in your land. What would you say is the most important aspect of justice that we as Americans can use to restore our land and our covenant? And how do we strengthen our bond with the State of Israel? Thank you.
Well, these are incredible, incredible questions. I'll start with the first one because it's the harder one and very interesting. Look, there's a national pastime in America on both sides of the political debate of misquoting the Bible erroneously and stupidly. This is something that people left and right enjoy doing and do extremely well. One of the frequently oft abused sentiments is tzedek, tzedek tirduf, justice, justice you shall pursue. which people, especially on the progressive side of the political divide, like to believe means, well, you know, the idea is that we need to have a just society, meaning having a just society means having a society where everyone feels welcome and loved. And the Bible certainly says much about supporting the orphan, the widow, the stranger in your midst, etc. The Bible also goes to great lengths to talk about borders, to talk about exclusion, to talk about who lives where and participates in what. The fact that you mentioned, for example, started your question by mentioning the no-hide laws, the Bible makes it also very, very clear that there are different rules for Jews and non-Jews, not because one group is superior to the other. Immediately, the modern worldview sees every distinction as some kind of weird, kind of nefarious attempt to have one group lord it over the other, because modern progressive politics cannot view the world except via the lens of power. Everything is power. That's the only thing these people are interested in. Therefore, if you walk into a church or a synagogue or whatever, and there's, say, separate seating, aha, that's because the men wish to be mean to the women. There is no other potential possible explanation except oppression. End of story. The Bible is very, very clear on borders, divisions, and distinctions. I think justice begins there. I think justice begins in understanding that justice is not an amorphous concept. It's not, hey, be nice. I mean, the Bible could have been a much shorter, easier to study book if it was just like, can you just be good? Just be a decent person, which is, by the way, what Bill Maher, for example, the way he defines religion. Like, well, I don't need this crap because I just be a good person. Well, it turns out that being a good person is very hard because each one of us has a slightly different understanding of what that means, and the clashes between us are endless, which is why we need a set of rules. And we can't have a set of rules unless we have a set of very clearly defined borders and distinctions between us. There are things men must do and things women must do. There are things that Americans could do and things that non-Americans could do. There are borders to tell these categories apart. To me, the problem and the solution begins right there. And I'm delighted that so much of the energy of this administration goes precisely towards redrawing these borders between male and female, between American and non-American, not, God forbid, as means of distinction, oppression, etc., but rather so that this kind of natural order can regain, so that we can actually start following and practicing justice in its innate true form. The other question that you asked is very interesting. What can America do to support Israel more? I want to answer in the broadest term possible. I could go into policy. There are so many intricate and interesting things to talk about. I've written about America-Israeli policy and political relations for a very long time. But I want to go back to a distinction that I think is very important. These days, you would hear, even from a lot of people who say that they're fans of or supporters of the state of Israel, well, but of course, I have many problems with the policy here, there, and everywhere. I understand this instinct. I think it's very dumb and very dangerous. A while back, I wrote an article, we were just discussing it, Audrey and I, about how there effectively are two groups of people, if you will, in America. There are the troubled committed and the untroubled committed. The troubled committed will tell you, I love America, but I can't believe that our government is doing this and this and this. I love America, but I can't believe that we're siding with this ally or that ally. I love America, but I can't believe that income inequality or environmental this or that or the other. This is not to say that these critiques are not valid, but it is to say that once you begin this sentence with but, you have guaranteed nothing but your slow and steady decline into no longer loving America. It is not that hard to come and say, I love this country. I want to support its allies. I see a country out there fighting savages. Hey man, I support this country. This is where the discussion ends. To me, hearing, well, of course I like Israel, but I don't understand the rationale. It's the same as hearing the, like, well, of course I think there's a difference between men and women, but also, why can't there be 57 genders? Because I've just opened this entire intellectual sphere to discussion, and now I'm just sliding further and further down, which again, is not an invitation to ignore or try to fix crucial problems. It's not an invitation to kind of paper over dark chapters in our history. But it is very much an invitation, an exhortation, if you will, to begin, lead, and focus on love and support. And say, yeah, I see Israel. Does it do a million things that are messed up? Sure, man, every country does. However, this is a free and democratic society and great ally of the United States fighting a gaggle of absolute savage animals who are very interested in destroying us too. This is where the conversation really ends. Any but that comes after that is not just superfluous, but morally and intellectually dangerous.
Hi. I agree with you that part
Your
of the reason.
name? Hello.
Hi, I'm John. Hi.
Hey, John.
I agree with you that part of the issue with this war in America has been we've been attacked by these lost souls. But I think we kind of slightly differ essentially on how we fix this. I believe that these lost souls have become from the turning away of Christ and the founding nation, in the founding that America is a Christian nation. The having to be able to bring about this Christian revival and showing the love and peace to our neighbors, instead not calling them barbarians and savages, but show them love. It has been said unto you to hate your neighbor and love your enemy, to love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say unto you, love your enemies. This is what we need to do. So why is it necessary? Why would we not a Christian revival in America be enough to be that beacon we need out in the world?
I can't tell you how happy it makes me truly to hear your talk. I'm way too much of a Jew to plug into these wonderful elated Christian notions. Though I embrace them with enthusiasm and with passion, I just have one big problem. In fact, I have two. The first big problem that I have is that from time to time, as you do, as we all do in this room, I like to read the sort of founding documents of this country. I would be relieved, frankly, if anywhere it said America is a Christian nation founded for and by Christians. That would solve a lot of problems and decide a lot of the debates that we're having. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that it's a Jewish state. It doesn't say that it's a Muslim or Hindu or atheist state. It simply avoids this question because it understands something that I think all of us people of faith understand and adhere to so passionately, that the point of the covenant that I talked about isn't that we are entering into it because we belong to a small group called Catholics, or called evangelicals, or called Jews, or called landowners, or called anything else, but simply because we're Americans. And this working together and papering over all these differences and creating a society that takes all these tensions into account, and out of that forges in this great spiritual crucible of this amazing godly nation the strength to build our society, is a very, very incredible, special thing. But now I want to make it a little bit darker, because two other things in what you said, I think merit an address. The first has to do with, well, why can't we just love our neighbors instead of calling them barbarians? Again, what a wonderful, and I mean this truly and sincerely, what a wonderful sentiment that truly inspires me and sort of balances, a lot of the darkness that so many of us feel. However, I, again, based on my own reading of the Bible, believe very much in moral agency. We're now reading the great book of Deuteronomy, the strange final book of the Bible, which is a long epic poem by Moses. And the great theme of this book is you have a choice. "הנה נתתי לפניכם היום את הברכה ואת הקללה." I have put before you today a blessing and a curse. You go ahead and follow the godly ways, and you will be blessed. You could go ahead and blaspheme, and you will be cursed. Looking at individuals, and it does not excuse them that they are young or passionate or not knowledgeable or brainwashed or whatever, who are marching down the street on the second anniversary of October 7th, saying, "We want to do this again," saying, "We are happy these things happened," saying, "We support the perpetrators." There is no way back from that. These are not our neighbors. These are not our friends. These are not our brothers and sisters. These can never be our brothers and sisters. There can be no truth and reconciliation with people who stood up and said, "I wish to kill you." That is the very distinct teaching of the testament that some in this room would call old. Now, to the last point that I want to make about your truly wonderful question. Does that mean then that we must abandon this great big Christian energy? The answer is God forbid. Because while we know that America is not a Christian nation or a Jewish nation or a Muslim nation, we know one thing, and we know it for certain. It is a godly nation. It is a nation that makes absolutely no sense without profound and devout faith in the Creator. The paths to Him are many, but the spirit and the heart is one. And so I would much rather focus the energy on deep, deep, deep reconnection with our tradition, each according to their own permutations and beliefs. Some of us will study the Talmud and shake a very large palm frond while holding, a small lemon, as we do on this wonderful holiday of Sukkot. Some would read the Gospels. Some would visit a mosque. It is fine. Connect to this godly energy. Connect to the divine energy that connects all of us together under this great big banner of America. But understand, again, as I said in my previous response, that there are boundaries. And the people who chose to be outside of this, the people who said, "We want you dead," are not people we can or should consider letting back into our fold.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm James.
Hey, James.
Unfortunately, my question won't be as insightful as JT's, but this is more of a clarification question. Would you consider somebody who had a peaceful protest, who does not donate to a terrorist group, who's full citizen or non-citizen permanent resident, would you consider them waving the flag of Palestine to be protected First Amendment speech?
Absolutely. It's very, very simple. There is no, look, peaceful protests, obviously this, I think all of you probably learned this in kindergarten, is a sort of foundational, fundamental building block of American civic society. But now I think we need to take 5 steps back and we need to observe what's going on. For example, the person standing with a large flag of Palestine across the street from my kids' school, a Jewish day school in Manhattan, where children go to get an education. Not IDF soldiers, not Israeli diplomats, Jewish kids learning, math and Torah. Is that person protesting in good faith? The answer is negotiable. Is that person's protest protected? I would argue very much that though it infuriates me, and though I believe it is bigoted and hateful, yes, it is.
Okay.
What happens when the same person then marches and tries to occupy News Corp building and forcefully stops people from entering the building, as happened yesterday in Manhattan? Is that person staging a peaceful protest? I think now we're on shakier ground. I think part of the problem of having this conversation is that we have let the pendulum swing wildly. We've had about 15 years, if not more, of a progressive-run educational system that championed activism to the almost exclusion of everything else. What is a good citizen? Well, it's an activist. Public schools in New York, and I assume in some parts of Texas too, have entire units dedicated to activism that end with the students rising up and being activists, not learning American history, not understanding, the intricacies of, say, law or constitutional premises, etc., but rather encouraged to go ahead and make their voices heard. Of course, always within the very narrow umbrella of progressive acceptable causes. It cannot be, that you're, say, organizing a pro-life march. It has to be the climate or transgender rights, etc., because that is really the game. Now, I think part of what that did, and again, I think nefariously so, is create an entire permission structure in which if you were doing things that were even blatantly violent and disruptive, you still very much were basking in the light of, peaceful protest. Here's a classic example. About 8 months ago, give or take, a bunch of pro-Palestinian protesters with Hamas flags marched down the streets of a distinctly Jewish Orthodox neighborhood in New York, very late at night, shouting very loudly, banging on doors, banging on cars, etc. The question, is this a peaceful protest? I would answer no. I would answer that it constitutes harassment. It is disrupting the right of the Jewish residents to the peaceful enjoyment of their properties, and again, targeting them for no other reason than their ethnic and religious identity. To me, that's a big problem. A sane society has this conversation on the merits of the facts and the nuances. Up until very recently, we were not this kind of society, because when people took to the streets and burned entire American cities to the ground, the caption on the television was mostly peaceful protests. And suddenly it was okay to protest in the streets, though I couldn't go to synagogue because of COVID-19, but a mass demonstration of 500,000 people, or 50,000 people rather, in the streets of New York was completely okay because it was for the right cause. I think kind of reducing the inflammation and once again having a civil adult discussion on the precise limits of what constitutes protected free speech and what constitutes just blatant hateful harassment is a very good idea. And here's the thing, it's happening already. It's happening just because local authorities and local communities have to adjudicate these questions because we're living through them. I think it's a very clarifying moment, but I totally see your point, and I think this is one of these questions where proceeding with caution and nuance is a very good policy.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Theo.
Hello, Theo.
As an aspiring law student, lawyer, and judge myself, I would like to get into the nitty-gritty of some wording of yours.
Please.
Earlier you said that saying, I love America, but I love the West, but is morally wrong, corrupt.
Yes.
I would like to ask, is saying, I love America, I love Western civilization, therefore we ought to stop sending funds to the Contras or to Pinochet or to organizations that destabilize the Middle East or Israel. Is that wrong?
Again, another wonderful question that once more, I think, credits this fine university for having selected the best. And the best, believe me, this is not a question I would have ever received in Columbia. I would put it this way, and I take the question in the spirit in which it was given. To me, it is very much a matter of where the focus lies. I think saying, look, it is my profound and untroubled and deep commitment to this country and its ultimate goals and flourishing that leads me to adjudicate every policy and every decision that I make. Therefore, I believe that there is a whole host of decisions that we ought to make or not make. This is very simple. I think that's a very, very healthy and straightforward approach to it. That, however, is not what you're hearing from the just asking questions crowd, right? A perfect example here would be Tucker Carlson, a man who started out by like, oh, of course I'm an American patriot, but I'm just asking question. Hey, could it be? I don't know how many of you saw his interview with the notoriously idiotic self-styled historian Daryl Cooper, in which Mr. Cooper said that it is indeed a fact, after he admitted to having read, get this, 23 books, which is a lot of books to read about World War II, all you need to know, stated clearly that Hitler was the good guy. It was Churchill who was the true aggressor. He indeed instigated the war against the peaceful Hitler because some people, we won't tell you who they are, but they control the money and the media, they were really uppity against this poor innocent German painter. This is where the logic of yes, but leads you to. It is a bad faith logic which is morally and intellectually flawed from the beginning. Once you say, I love America and I have no reservations, I want it to win and I have no reservations, what comes next almost doesn't matter. And we could have real disagreements. For example, we could say, I love America. As a result, I think Ronald Reagan did extremely well to support all kinds of regimes in Latin America who were horrendous oppressors of their own people, because the thing that mattered the most was, securing Americans' interests in the region. You could just as easily say, hey man, I love America. Therefore, I actually think we should support them because kind of morally bad, plus it will there'll be a backlash against us, a whole host of reasons, both moral and practical. That's a wonderful discussion to have. And we could have it over several glasses of bourbon, and there will not be any animosity because the focal point of the discussion is the same. We want to make sure that this society of ours, this project of ours, flourishes. What comes next is a matter of conversation, and there's no one right way. It is very important to understand that in almost every corner of American civic discourse, left, and I'm very sad to say right as well, that is not what you're seeing. You're seeing Tucker, you're seeing Candace Owens. Oh, did you know that the Mossad killed Charlie Kirk? Why? Because they convinced other rich Jews to stop giving him money. The noxious individual calling himself comic Dave Smith, which is like me calling myself skinny Liel Leibovitz, is sitting there saying, well, of course there's a genocide in Gaza, and I'm just asking questions, but it seems to me that the Israeli army really killed all these Israelis on October 7th because they wanted to blame it on the poor Arabs. Bad faith when you see it, and this word but is a dead giveaway. Once you've crossed this chasm and saying, hey man, 100% here, 100% committed, there are 7,000 different ways. There is not one way. On matters international and domestic, we could have real disagreements, and the disagreements would be incredibly painful and meaningful. Yet they will sort of be, they will feel almost natural because they're the kind of disagreements you have with your family. When my wife overrules me, which is often, about decisions, this, that, or the other, even big decisions, I don't wake up in the morning saying, I hate you, and now I wish to humiliate you. That is not what a healthy family dynamic looks like. So I take your point with gratitude and love. I think you're completely correct. It is a distinction worth making. But I also urge everyone here to look for that but, because we're seeing way too much of it these days.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Miles.
Hey, Miles.
There have been a lot of propositions to end this war, somehow end the conflict. The Trump's 20 points, GITA, and in July, there was the two-state proposition at NATO. Now, what we saw from this, whether you think it was right or wrong, was a majority of the world voted with Palestine. And I'm curious, as an expert yourself, do you see a way in which this war is able to be ended swiftly? Do you see a way in which we can get a majority of the world to agree with Israel and America? Or is there a world where Israel and America maybe have to take a step back to align with the rest of the world's views? I'm curious on your opinions.
You're asking great questions, but there are two very different questions. Do I see a way in which this world can end swiftly? Oh, yes. Do I see a way in which I could get the world to agree with Israel? No. Nor do I want this, nor, frankly, do I care, even in the least. Who is disagreeing with Israel? The country where the literal rapist is out on bail, but the person who said something mean about Muslims on Twitter stayed in prison? That is the great moral giant, the great British Empire that I need to kowtow to? The French, which have gone through 5 prime ministers in the last, 26 hours or whatever it is, and violent demonstrations are bringing them to their knees, and they have, really no chance of emerging from this except as some kind of hideous, either extreme left or extreme right monster. The Germans, who let in hundreds of thousands of people, then abused them, then kind of put them to the corner, waiting again for the prompt to bring them to the knees. These countries are gone. Europe is gone. It brings me no pleasure to say it, but it has no future. It does not matter. It is like worrying that the Ewoks are condemning you. Like, I'm sorry, you're cute and fuzzy little bears, but you're not a real player in this world. There are a lot of other players, and they're serious, and you could see their kind of calculations by the fact that they are far, far, far more observant, shall we say, of the situation. There are no major pro-Palestinian demonstrations in Saudi Arabia, for example. Because these people, for better or worse, live in reality. I may not always agree with their kind of plans. In fact, I frequently don't. But they share an observable reality. And so I think winning the war means, first and foremost, freeing yourself from this notion that Israel must in any way, shape, or form care what anyone thinks, especially the decadent and dying continent of Europe, which has been busy dying since 1914. It's literally all they've been doing for about 110 years. What then must be done? I said this in my remarks, and I say this with no particular pleasure because it sounds like, a kind of very red-blooded, full-throated kind of macho ululation that I don't particularly care for. All appearances to the contrary. There are really only 2 currencies that matter in the Middle East. There are not 3, It's land and it's humiliation. To win this war, Israel must make sure that its enemies understand that the old ways of doing business in which you attack, you exert your price, there is a ceasefire, there are peace negotiations, there's international aid, there's rebuilding, and then there's the next round, which is the story we have been living through for 25 years at the very least now. We need to make sure that that is over. I think the only way to do it is, A, to seize vast quantities of land and make these people understand, okay, listen, man, we didn't start the war. In fact, the day before the war started, the biggest discussion in Israel politically was, should we give Gazans 15,000 work permits, or should we up the number to 20,000 work permits because we really want them to have a robust economy so that maybe they could one day overthrow Hamas. By the way, worth noting in here that while literally every other Arab nation at some point stood at great risk and at least tried to topple its dictator during the Arab Spring, Palestinian society did no such thing. Which is because, and you could hear this from the testimonies of the hostages returning from captivity, held for the most part by civilians, not by Hamas or Islamic Jihad. This is a population-wide project. There is no difference between Hamas and the Gazan people. This is a joint effort to destroy the state of Israel. And so the state of Israel must respond by A, seizing territory, which President Trump made very clear earlier on this year. I'm sad and chagrined that Israel didn't have the wherewithal to accept his proposal and do as he counseled. And second of all, deal the kind of unerring humiliation to Hamas from which there is no escape. I think, for example, that it is a tragic mistake to even negotiate with these people before before every single hostage is back home. The hostages coming back is the precondition, or ought to be the precondition, to even talking. Again, we're not losing this war. We ought to be winning it. I think Israel is slower to understand it than it should. The joke, of course, being that in the international press, European press, you would read descriptions of Bibi Netanyahu as some kind of, blood mad butcher, whereas in reality, he's a kind of cautious to a fault politician who frequently sort of kind of rules out options that are very beneficial to his own cause and people simply because he is really not a fan of sort of big, bold, sweeping moves. But I think Israel will have no choice. It's either this administration in Israel or the next. At some point, we'll have to have a real, swift, and decisive victory. This means stopping the nonsense about even acknowledging the possibility that a quote-unquote Palestinian state is something that is real. It is no more real than, Narnia or Middle Earth are real. And second of all, understanding that the path forward isn't yet another infusion of international aid, which will just be translated to more bucks to terrorism, terror tunnels, etc., but rather in making sure that our enemies understand, as Hezbollah now understands, as the Iranians now understand, that actions have very dear consequences, and they're going to get dearer and dearer every time you try something.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ramya. Thank
Hi.
you for your time today. I was wondering, do you think idealism is dangerous and that Americans should read Hobbes' Leviathan?
Wow. Guys, can I just take another moment to say, you're just the best. I'm loving this so much. Questions about Leviathan, questions on Crusades, it's just fantastic. This is a very loaded question. One that, depending on the time of day and the amount of martinis I had, I would answer radically differently. I think, again, the Bible here is a tremendously wise guide. There is a story in the Bible that it kind of haunts me still because it seems so unfair. It goes right to the heart of your question. So most of the book of Leviticus spends hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of words. I used to know the exact numbers. The Bible uses something like, I think 65 verses or something to describe the entire creation of the world as we know it. And then something like 431 verses to describe the Mishkan, which is God's temporary dwelling place on earth, which is a thing that disappears as soon as you build a temple. It makes no sense. But at the heart of the celebration, they finally have the Mishkan. They build it. It's an amazing thing. By the way, if you read the Bible carefully and in Hebrew, which you should do if you can, the outside of the Mishkan is built from unicorn hides, which is crazy cool. Not just unicorn hides, but the unicorns are rainbow colored. The Bible tells you all of this, and you're like, what? They're rainbow-colored unicorns? This is an insane fact. But they build this thing, and they erect it, and it's inauguration day, right? It's the happiest day for these people who've been erring through the wilderness for months and months and months now. And Aaron, the great priest, Moses' brother, has two sons. They are the priests. Their names are Nadav and Avihu. They are idealists. They are very committed. They're into this. Right? This is their life. This is their passion. This is their everything. And they come into the Mishkan and they come into the Holy of the Holies and they offer a sacrifice. And the Bible tells us that they offered a sacrifice, esh zara, a foreign fire, meaning not in the way that it was prescribed by God. And they both die. And you stop to think wait, what? These were great guys. These were the priests. Their sin is that they were too idealistic. Their sin is that they cared too much. They loved God too much. That's a sin that's insane. And of course, there's reams and reams and reams of rabbinic interpretations. But I think the answer goes precisely to the heart of your question. It's the Torah's way of telling us, yes, but. Great fire is wonderful and essential. Idealism and commitment and passion are the sine qua non of a civilization that is constantly busy being born and reinventing itself. However, engage in it, and you run the very real risk of offering foreign fire. And you could tell this just by reading the history of literally every single ideological movement. I was trained in Columbia University by a former friend who passed away, sadly, named Todd Gitlin, who was the head of Students for Democratic Society in the 60s. And he frequently told the story of how the real and passionate idealism of fixing so many of the things that were legitimately wrong and needed fixing in America in the late 1960s and early 1970s deteriorated naturally and effortlessly into the violence of movements like the Weathermen and some, Black Liberation Army, etc. That to me is the perpetual warning for all of us who truly believe and are truly on fire, to beat the metaphor some more, in the power of idealism to change things. To always stop and say, have we crossed the line? Have we offered foreign fire? Have we let our passion and commitment override other passions and commitments to common civil discourse, to traditions, to basic human decency? When idealism is unchecked, the answer is almost always yes. But when idealism is lacking, almost nothing could ever be done. So one more. Okay, it's one gentleman who waited so patiently. And that gentleman is?
Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Hello. Let's see. I took notes because I was really. Okay, you referred to the idea of a titanic structure built by the left that is.
Yes.
That is sort of the enemy that needs to be dismantled. So let's see. What form does this titanic structure take? And who exactly built it? And what process do we use to dismantle it?
I will now begin hour one of three of my answer. We could talk about this at great length. I will try a brief, and then we could all go up and have dinner. The brief is that nothing about this, though it sounds very conspiratorial, there's some kind of secretive cabal that brings together all these money people and culture people and party people. There's nothing really mysterious about it. The first thing that you ought to do is go look at funding, and sometimes it is made somewhat murky. But if you look at the organizations that fund literally every group that is at the front of every major ascendant progressive cause, from Palestine to transgender to no borders to anti-ICE, etc., it is the same people. It is the same people funding and the same people organizing. Unions, sadly, have become a major organizing tool of a lot of these protests, which is why you see them involved in the Palestine movement, and which is why they are almost singularly in charge of the anti-ICE riots. All of them get their money from a series of, a small group of very powerful donors. I mentioned Soros. There are a host of others. I could send you a bunch of very intricate tablet magazine pieces. This is done with the enthusiastic support of the Democrat Party, with the affirmation of media and cultural institutions who increasingly see it as their role to govern speech and policy. I'll give you just one example. Everyone, especially sort of champions of free speech, loved being up at arms when ABC decided to suspend Jimmy Kimmel. Here's a fun fact. Since the beginning of the year, Stephen Colbert had a Democratic politician on every 3 programs. Does anyone care to guess how many Republicans are on the air? I think you know the answer. The answer is 0. It's a pretty good question to ask. Hey, I'm sorry, the public airwaves are a public resource. Why are we putting up with a basically partisan operative using this time in the guise of entertainment under the auspices of a large corporation to indoctrinate us rather than actually either entertain or have some informed political debate? If you look at the structure of how this thing was built, it is not particularly interesting and surprising. It is how political power works in the early 21st century. The 20th century was a time for great, partisan kind of engagement and bickering. The 21st figure a better way. In part, this was done because we now have very potent media platforms. We have never before had media platforms who could reach so many people at such a magnitude in such complete ways. In part, it's because we have wealth on a very different scale. If you look at the relative buying power of the great robber barons of the early 20th century, they pale in comparison to the Jeff Bezoses of today. And so this structure was created in which the culture, media, politics, all that moves in lockstep. It sounds very ominous and it sounds unbeatable, except for none of this is true. As I noted in my talk, we have a bunch of very, very, very good laws at our disposal. Like, for example, saying, hey, man, if you accept a lot of money from a person who's basically an operative of the Chinese Communist Party, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Except saying, hey, if you're a judge and you think you could just basically make president, say, I'm sorry, I know that the democratically elected president just, made some executive order or, passed some law that is, with Congress, that is based on perfect, precedented legal tradition, etc. I'm going to override it because I'm a good person and I'm going to get the applause of the media when I do it because I stood up to Trump. Yeah, no, well, we're not going to put up with this. We actually have a series of very, very, very easy measures, but it starts with something much more profound. It starts with not caring. You're a fascist. Cool, man. No problem. You're a misogynist, transphobic, hateful, bad person. Whatever you say, dude. All good. No problem. I don't care. The power goes away. Once you say, all right, you could squawk all you want. I simply don't care. I'm engaged in a totally different game. And I'm not engaging with you. I'm not wasting another second talking to you because you don't really want to talk to me. You want to shout me down. One of the things that really was so heartbreaking watching Charlie Kirk's old videos after his assassination is seeing how many of these kids were actually, unlike Charlie, who was there with an open mind and an open heart, despite having very strong convictions, a lot of these kids were not. They were there to win an argument. They were there to humiliate him for a social media moment. When you see people like that, just walk away, man. I'm sorry, I know it's a very unchristian thing to do, and maybe opposed to this great big spirit of American debate, so we should always talk to everyone. But at some point, these people have made it very clear they're not actually interested in talking to us. And so let's take away their power to control the conversation by using these bad, ominous, scary terms, and let's, instead of wasting time listening to their insane, ravings, let's actually find the people with whom we could talk, of whom there are so many. That is the crazy thing. I firmly believe the overwhelming majority of Americans are absolutely normal people trying to find a way out of this mess. Which is why, for example, you have voters who voted for Obama one election cycle and Trump the other. These are not, highly ideological, hate-filled, motivated people. These are just people who are trying to navigate a world in flux. We absolutely could talk to them. And we should, rather than the lunatics. And with that, I want to tell you what a pleasure this has been. And I'm going to be here a bunch in the next couple of weeks. And I hope we could continue this conversation for a very long time. Thank you, UATX. Thank you.